Hey guys, today we're going to be taking a look at Battlefield 6 using the RTX 5090. We're using the MSI Gaming X Trio version of the card with 32 gigabytes of GDDR7 video memory. We're playing on the latest NVIDIA drivers, pairing with a 9800 X3D as well as 64 gigabytes of DDR5. Now, I will mention I did already a benchmark using the 5090 as well as a lot of other cards on the Battlefield 6 beta, which was just about a month or so ago. I have a playlist on my channel. I'll link a few below if you want to check those out. I actually don't expect performance to be too different, but I will test a few cards here. And last thing before we get started, I just figured I would point out part of the reason that I did decide to purchase this game and benchmark it, despite the fact that there was already a beta that is likely very indicative of the game that I have spent time benchmarking a lot of different cards, is just how many people are playing Battlefield 6. I've pulled up some statistics here. Battlefield 1 all-time peak 53,000 players. Battlefield 5, 116,000, Battlefield 2042, the latest release, 107,000, and Battlefield 6, all-time peak at release date just today, 747,000 players. So it is an incredibly popular game. Thought it'd be interesting, jump in here with the most powerful GPU, see what we can get. Let's hop in. All right, starting off here real simple at 1080p, and I do have to say I do not like the way that these settings are laid out personally. We're going to go for Overkill, so these are the max graphic options here, completely maxed out. And as far as our anti-aliasing, just using TAA to begin with. All right, so loading in here at max 1080p settings. Again, this is just using TAA for our anti-aliasing. I will mention up front here, when I benchmarked Battlefield 6 prior, I did get quite a few comments about the CPU temperature. I will just say up front here that the throttling temperature of a 9800 X3 is 95 degrees Celsius. So some games like open world games or multiplayer games like this that have really large maps, sometimes they will see our temperature rise, especially when we're pairing with a high power draw, high heat GPU like a 5090. You will oftentimes see our CPU usage high and the temperature go up. But as long as it does not reach 95 degrees, that is where I have it set, and that's the maximum that you can have it set to actually, operate at before it starts dipping. I will also mention that I do have an AIO. I have all the specs for the PC that I benchmark in the description. I have it in the description for all my videos. So I have an AIO, I have the case, the power supply, I have every bit of kit that I use, and it's essentially, top of the line. There's not really a ton that we could be doing any differently. Now here you can see at 1080p, we are just ever so slightly, looks like we are in a maybe CPU bound scenario. Only reason I'm saying that is just because we are seeing our GPU utilization kind of fluctuate, not really stuck rock solid at a high utilization. But in general here, the game is rendering nicely. This uses that Frostbite engine, which has shown to be like a really, well-performing engine. And the good 1% lows at around 180, averaging it at around 260, which is very similar to what we saw in the beta. So it doesn't seem like it is really all that different, if any different at all. Game looks great, performs well. I will say the TAA, while it's not the best anti-aliasing solution, it is seemingly rendering our image just fine. Now at 1080p is where anti-aliasing is important, and because we have some GPU overhead, we have room to kind of tax our GPU a bit more. Let's throw on DLAA and see how that performs. All right, now with DLAA applied here, does give us a better looking picture, definitely a little bit sharper here, and really not a huge difference when it comes to our FPS. In fact, at least at this particular moment, we're actually getting slightly higher, which oftentimes, when you use something like DLAA, when you are putting more of a load on your GPU, if you are in a CPU bound scenario like this, you can at times certainly see the card kind of perform a little bit better because, typically when you're playing a game, if you're in a GPU bound scenario, that's a little bit more consistent of an experience. When you're kind of limited by your CPU, it's typically a little bit stuttery, but regardless, no major stutters to really complain about here. Seemingly a really smooth experience. And we are actually averaging out with DLAA applied about 10 FPS, or maybe slightly under 10 FPS higher. So definitely a really solid experience. Now, don't want to spend a ton of time at 1080p, but let's just see what we can get here just for fun. Throw it on low, so completely low settings, so not really taxing our card whatsoever here. And we'll stick with DLAA for our anti-aliasing. So moving over to the low setting here, you can see it doesn't really make a ton of difference. We are definitely now, I can safely say that around 250 FPS, right around that area is kind of just going to be our limit when playing at native here. Seems to be pretty much just a CPU bound scenario. Now, I will say these low settings still look pretty solid. That's what I experienced in the beta as well. There's not a huge difference in visual quality moving, you know, from overkill to low. It's not like night and day difference. Now, I'm sure if we do a side-by-side comparison, we will be able to see some of those differences, but as far as just, you know, generally playing, not a huge difference. Though our FPS actually is climbing a bit more as we're kind of loading in now. Now we're kind of hovering around 280. Now, some of that will certainly just be the fact that we are on different maps, different things are going on, just kind of the nature of a multiplayer benchmark like this. But in general, game still looks great with the DLAA applied to. It looks incredibly sharp. Really, really solid looking picture here. Now, just for fun, let's see if we were to throw on DLSS at just balanced here. So just a modest DLSS implementation here. See if we get any higher FPS. Wouldn't really go much lower than balanced here at 1080p. And it looks like, honestly, not that different. So, you know, obviously we are seeing that our GPU is certainly not being taxed whatsoever, sitting at 54 degrees Celsius. Our CPU is certainly heating up at around 85 degrees. But again, like I said, open world games like this just tend to tax the CPU a little bit more. And this game in particular is pretty CPU heavy from what I can tell. So if you're pairing a 5090 with a weaker CPU, you could potentially see slightly different performance, but in general, still very, very solid FPS here. If you are playing at 1080p on a 5090, you're used to be, you know, getting pretty much max FPS, and for this particular title, you're basically going to be getting close to 300 FPS regardless of settings. All right, now moving over to 1440p, which is certainly a resolution I expect people with a 5090 to at least be playing at, and we'll be on this Overkill preset with TAA as our anti-aliasing. All right, moving over here to 1440p, certainly is seeing a higher amount of GPU utilization, so much more healthy amount of GPU utilization, sitting right around 95 or so. Our CPU is slightly less taxed in this situation, at least to begin with here. I'm not sure if that will stay true, but certainly still here at native max settings, still getting an incredibly, you know, competitive high FPS. Definitely really solid experience. And again, you know, the fact that we're not using Unreal Engine 5 in this particular title is leading to such great 1% lows. 140 1% lows with 190 for our average. Flat frame time graph, smooth FPS, even in this open world environment. Incredibly, incredibly great experience here. And really, TAA, in my opinion, looks just fine. Let's go for DLSS and move over to the balanced preset. And the balanced preset is looking really solid here. And in fact, in my opinion, even better than TAA, while giving us a pretty significant performance increase. So this is seeing us right around 250, 1% lows at 190. And we are now on the same map at max settings where we were at low settings. And I guess, you know, when I'm really trying to look at it carefully, if I were to guess, maybe the low preset, some of these like smaller details like grass and things like that are not quite as detailed. But in general, there's not a huge difference, especially not just if you're coming in here and just trying to play the game. There's not going to be a huge noticeable difference as far as like, you know, your experience here. So if you want to go for a lower preset and you're getting a little bit more FPS, you're really not leaving a ton on the table when it comes to your visuals. You're not missing out on a lot, in my opinion. Now, I wish that I would have tested which DLSS model this game actually has. So I will actually, after we finish the 1440p testing, before we go to 4K, I will enable our overlay so we can see. I believe it is preset K, so that being the case, I do feel okay going all the way over to ultra performance. I'm not actually expecting it to be that difference of performance, given the fact that it looks like right around, you know, the high 200s, mid 200s seems to kind of be our limit just as far as our CPU pairing at this point. So as you can see, our GPU utilization has dropped significantly. Now, this is, you know, a good thing if you wanted just not to put as much, well, I was, okay, definitely standing still there a little too long, but if you wanted to just not tax your GPU as much, you can see we're pulling about 350 watts. For a lot of GPUs, that would be high. For a 5090, you know, when we get up to 4K, you'll see this card can easily pull upwards of 550, 570 watts. So seeing it all the way down at 300 is a little bit cooler. It's definitely running pretty cool, sitting around 62 degrees. Our CPU as well is hanging on 86 degrees. You know, I know some people may look at 86 degrees and be like, oh my gosh, your case ventilation must be terrible. It almost makes me want to like upload a photo of my case and it's set up. It's in a really open air area. It's a dual chamber PC. You know, it has 9 fans or something like that with an AIO, and you know, it's a 360 millimeter AIO. Again, a lot of these specs are in the description, but you know, games like this, open world games, especially Battlefield. In fact, I think Battlefield, out of every game that I've benchmarked, Battlefield 6 seemingly is the one that really increases my my temperature when it comes to our CPU the most. So really solid performance here. 1% lows looking absolutely great. Frame time graph, as you can see, basically completely flat. Really solid experience here at max settings, 1440p. So for a more competitive experience, let's actually just go down to the low graphics quality, which sets everything down here to low. Then as far as our DLSS, we'll go ahead and turn it off. Just use TAA, which at 1440p, TAA is just fine for anti-aliasing. So moving over here to low settings definitely gives us a a significant performance increase, and still looks pretty solid. I mean, as far as low settings, most games do not look this good at low settings. Now, if we get close to textures, things like that, you can definitely start to see some of what's kind of not looking super great. But we are being rewarded with these low settings, getting a significant performance increase, sitting right around 270 so far. Because we died so fast, I'll go ahead and restart counting here. So, although you can see, pretty solid FPS, 1% low is still really good at 180. Frame time graph completely flat. So really smooth experience, competitive type experience here without any sort of upscaling. Rather than going for that upscaling to get this kind of FPS, now we're kind of just, adjusting our settings. So if we look at like foliage, actually we're still good getting like quite a bit of these like small details. So again, this low setting, I don't know, I'm kind of torn. I like when low settings, still look solid and a place that you want to play at. But I also do like when low settings are actually low and like bad in a way, because that means that they would likely be playable on lower end hardware. But in general here, obviously really solid performance and good looking visuals, so can't really complain too much. 250 on our average, 180 on our 1% lows. And just for fun, let's go ahead and throw on DLSS at ultra performance here, just to see. I imagine this will once again give us kind of a CPU bound scenario. Here you can kind of see some of the weirdness with DLSS, some of this kind of hazy effect that we're getting in these finer details. So that is certainly an issue when you start going for these super aggressive upscaling options, as there's quite a few enemies, it looks like, kind of coming onto our position here. But definitely, this does give you an increase. We have our frame rate limit off. However, I am noticing, and I noticed this in the menus too, it looks like it is kind of topping us out at 300 FPS. So actually, let's load back in and see if, even though there is not a frame rate limit applied here, it does seem to be that maybe there is a global 300 FPS frame rate limit built in. Now, I know there is like the tilde command, or I thought there was. Maybe you have to enable that in the settings. There may be an option to disable the frame rate limit, so I may have to look at that in the settings, or search that up in a moment here. But looks like we are, if there seemingly is a 300 FPS cap here, ultra performance, low 1440p. This is where we are certainly hitting that cap. So averaging at 290 at 1% lows at 211. Really solid performance here. Once again, CPU is kind of, it's hot. 86 degrees, 85 degrees is certainly a hot CPU, but not necessarily causing any sort of major issues. And this is definitely giving us a break on the GPU end, only pulling around 270 watts or so. So, if you are someone who just, you spent $2,000 on a 5090 and you kind of just want to make it last as long as possible, using these, options, using less heat, less power draw on your card, definitely, has the chance to just, make your card last a bit longer. All right, now moving up to 4K. I wasn't able to find a way to unlock the FPS. So we do have an option for a frame rate limit that, I can show you guys. It's off. So the 300 FPS limit, I'm not 100% sure if that is true, or anyways, I'm not sure exactly what that is. I'll have to investigate that more. But starting off here, 4K full screen here, max settings for our anti-aliasing, just using TAA. All right, so jumping here, 4K max settings. Now, what's really great here is just the fact that we are still getting a competitive FPS and solid 1% lows. Really can't overstate how important this is, and unfortunately, just how rare this is in games nowadays. Getting around 120 FPS on our average here, 98 1% lows. I mean, that's incredible performance for a game here at 4K. Everything is heating up a little bit, as you can see. Definitely, our temperatures are spiking as far as both our GPU and our CPU, but they're holding on nice. The 80 degrees, that might scare some people away, but really nothing too out of the ordinary for the 9800X 3D. And this is kind of what I was talking about, you know, where we were seeing around like you know, sub 300 power draw on our 5090 at some other settings. Now this is typically what you would see when you're really pushing the 5090, like around 550 to 570 on our power draw. So definitely nice to kind of get such great performance at lower power draw when we use that DLSS on some of our lower resolutions and lower presets. So definitely some added benefits there, even if you're not necessarily just getting turning on DLSS to get a bit higher FPS. So yeah, right around 120, 1% lows, just about 100. Super solid performance here. Really not much to complain about. And the image quality at native looks absolutely stellar. Even the fact that we are using DLAA, which is kind of a gross version of anti-aliasing, still looks pretty solid here at 4K. Now, certainly here at 4K is when we can definitely begin using a lot of DLSS. So actually, let's just go straight down to performance DLSS, which will hopefully we be able to see our preset here. It's kind of tough to see, but I believe that's a K down there. And the bottom left, unfortunately, is covered a bit by our HUD, but this does give you really solid picture quality. It uses that, I believe it's preset K, that model here, and you know, gives you a boost to your FPS as well. So where we were around 120, now we're seeing around close to 200, and our 1% lows are even higher than 120, sitting around 140 now. And this does give you a bit of a break too on the CPU or on the GPU end of things. So now you can see our GPU wattage being pulled. Even though the GPU is still being used, it's just being used in a different way. So we're using much more of those tensor cores that are specifically for the DLSS, which is resulting in much more efficient power draws. So now seeing under 500 watts and better performance, and in my opinion, honestly, similar if not better looking visual quality. This preset K model, which like 99% sure that this is preset K being applied here, looks absolutely phenomenal. Really, at 4K, you can begin using pretty aggressive upscaling. And in fact, we can probably even go to ultra performance. So let's do just that and slide down to ultra performance. And where we were around 200 FPS, now we're seeing right around 240. Let's try to get out a bit here, see if it does drop a little bit more. And it does slightly drop here, but still really solid performance here. And really just depending on what you're doing, what you're looking at, you may get some variance, but in general, really solid performance. And this is now seeing, you know, even lower power draws, sometimes dipping as low as like only 400 watts being pulled on our GPU. So really solid performance, good 1% lows, great looking picture, even at ultra performance using this preset K model. So really happy here at 4K max settings. Definitely a lot of options here. And this is without even using frame generation, which I don't like frame generation for multiplayer shooters. I don't think it is a good way to, you know, use the GPU. Now, if you are on a really weak GPU, like a 5060 or, you know, 5070 or something like that, and you need frame generation to kind of get to where you want to be, that's one thing. But a 5090 where we can kind of already natively get here, no real good reason to use frame generation. I really think frame generation, you know, its use case is far more like single player type titles. So, and really, as you can see, no need to use frame generation in this case. Getting around 200 FPS without any of that frame generation is really nice. And now, last thing to do at 4K here, I don't really think it's worth testing all these middle settings. I actually don't think there's much in terms of visual difference. So actually, let's just go straight down to low. So this is more so if you want to play at, you know, 4K, but you want to get best possible performance. So let's go low and go native resolution here at TAA for our anti-aliasing. All right, so now at 4K low settings, native resolution using TAA. Another way to definitely get a really solid FPS, as you know, I've been playing through a bunch of these maps, have not been doing so well, but this is definitely another way to get real solid FPS. So sitting right around, we'll go ahead and restart counting, make sure we're not getting super out of range results here, but right around 200 FPS. Power draw is also still pretty high given the fact that we're at native resolution. We can certainly address that and likely get a better picture and better performance using a bit of DLSS, but definitely here at native using TAA, really no major complaints. And honestly, low settings, I mean, you'll have to let me know, does this look like low settings? I mean, we played and benchmarked Call of Duty Black Ops 7, and low settings on that game was pretty terrible looking. The textures were terrible, going ADS, really bad. But here, I mean, low settings, while it's not giving us as much of a performance increase as when games really dumb down the settings, low settings, in my opinion, in this game still look really impressive. Getting around 200 FPS, really great 1% lows, 150. I know I've called out those 1% lows so much throughout this video, but I cannot overstate just how important it is when you're benchmarking a game or just when you're playing a game. Having solid 1% lows is so significant to actually, impacting your performance of the game. Bad 1% lows just wrecks an experience. So if you are, playing a game and you're getting 200, 150 FPS, whatever it is, but your 1% lows are not good, or they're choppy, your frame time graphs all over the place, it's going to feel like a terrible experience. So a lot of people, they remember playing on console, playing at 60 FPS, and that being a smooth experience. And that oftentimes, the reason why it is such a smooth experience is because that 60 FPS was a consistent, smooth 60 FPS oftentimes. It wasn't like jumping between 60 down to 40, down, up to 80, down to 40 again, down to 30. It was a consistent 60. And when you're looking at 1% lows in a frame time graph, the reason why those pieces of a benchmark like this are so important is because that is basically what's indicating that not only is the FPS high, but it's consistently high, and that those frames that are being delivered in a consistent manner to actually make it feel like a fluid experience. So a game like Call of Duty or Battlefield in this instance, or whatever, these multiplayer games, when they have consistent frame times and they feel good, that's when it really feels like you're getting high FPS. Oftentimes, high FPS with bad 1% lows feels like a low FPS. It feels like a choppy, stuttery experience. And unfortunately, that is the case in a lot of modern games. And, not to bring up an engine that has nothing to do with the game that we're benchmarking, but it's even more, common now, given the fact that Unreal Engine 5 is increasingly more and more popular. So really, when you're benchmarking game, average FPS is nice. Good 1% lows and good frame times are way, way better and far more important. Now on this low preset, let's see, just, crank everything. So let's just go for DLSS at ultra performance. So really looking for the best possible performance here. I want to play at 4K, but I just want the best possible performance. And what can this give us? Around 270, it's looking like. Our GPU utilization has dropped, and so has our power draw. So now we are seeing less than 400 watts, oftentimes sitting right around like 380, 390, 370 for a moment there. So while, there is certainly, some negatives when you're talking about using DLSS and super aggressive upscaling, the benefits are definitely here when you're looking at just, not taxing your card as much. Only using 7 gigabytes of video memory, also super impressive for an open world type map like this. So there are certainly a ton of benefits. And really, the other thing to really keep in mind is really solid FPS, 260, 200 FPS, 1% low, stock, flat, empty frame time graph looks absolutely incredible. And you can definitely see our CPU once again heating up. I know I've called that out a few times here. Again, 95 degrees is where we can kind of expect that to begin throttling. So we're not quite there. 90 is hot, but that is just the experience that I have seen in this game. It's not common in a lot of games, but this game in particular, and especially when we are pairing with a 5090 that's kicking out a lot of heat. Of course, the CPU, our 9800X3D, is right above our 5090 that's kicking out that heat. So until we hit that 95 temp on our CPU, we won't see any bottlenecking or anything like that, or any thermal throttling. But at this point, this is definitely a really, really solid place to play at as well. Really, 4K, you have a lot of options. You can go for higher settings, you can go for frame generation, or you can just go for native. And in a lot of these different presets, you're going to be getting really solid experience. And in fact, really, we weren't really able to get bad performance on this card across all settings. Even at 4K max settings with no upscaling, just using it at completely native, we're still getting 120 FPS. So overall, I'm just so happy to see that this card and this game is so well optimized using this older engine, this Frostbite engine, which is a bit dated, but we seem to be definitely getting better performance than a lot less dated, newer engines that unfortunately are not quite well optimized. Anyways, guys, that's been it for the RTX 5090 in Battlefield 6. Super happy with the performance here, and it is pretty similar to what we saw in the beta. There are some more graphics presets in the full game than we saw in the beta. If you're interested in seeing how other cards perform, I did benchmark a lot of other cards in the beta, and I will make sure that I link that in the description below, all the rest of those, as well as there is also a playlist that you can go and sort through to see some of those other tests. Remains to be seen just how many cards I'm going to test in Battlefield 6, but I did want to jump in and just kind of take a look at some of the changes here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.